Some people think that being 78 years old means you've lost your edge, that your mind has gone soft, that you're just a helpless relic waiting for someone younger to make decisions for you. They think gray hair means you've forgotten how the world really works, that wrinkles mean you've lost the ability to fight back when someone crosses a line that should never be crossed. Let me tell you something about assumptions. They can be the most dangerous mistake you ever make about someone, especially when that someone is a 78-year-old retired financial advisor who spent 45 years learning that respect isn't given, it's earned. And when people forget that lesson, sometimes you have to remind them in ways they'll never forget. My name is Dorothy Mitchell, and this is the story of how one bitter February night changed everything between me and my family. It's about betrayal, consequences, and the kind of justice that only comes when you've lived long enough to understand that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't anger, it's strategy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 78 years on this earth, and I thought I'd built something that would last. I thought the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd given, the financial security I'd provided would mean something when I needed it most. I was wrong. The cruelest lesson I learned came wrapped in the familiar faces of the people I'd trusted most, delivered with smiles that never reached their eyes, and justified with excuses that sounded reasonable until you really examined what they meant. I had raised 2 children as a single mother after my husband Robert died in a construction accident when I was 34. Daniel was my youngest, my sensitive child who used to crawl into my bed during winter storms, the one who promised he'd always take care of me when he grew up. Life has a cruel way of taking those innocent promises and twisting them into something you barely recognize. After Robert's death, I threw myself into work with a determination that surprised everyone, including myself. I'd always been good with numbers, but grief turned that talent into something sharper, more focused. I started as a bookkeeper at Henderson Financial Services, working nights after the kids went to sleep, studying for my certifications by lamplight while they did their homework at the kitchen table. It took me 8 years to become a licensed financial advisor, another 5 to build a client base that trusted me with their life savings. But success in the financial world taught me something valuable. Money isn't just currency, it's power. It's security. It's the difference between having choices and being at someone else's mercy. So I saved, I invested, I planned. Not just for my retirement, but for my children's futures, for emergencies, for the kind of security that meant no one in my family would ever have to face what I'd faced when Robert died. By the time I retired at 70, I'd accumulated more than most people see in a lifetime. Conservative investments, diversified portfolios, real estate holdings that had appreciated beyond my wildest dreams. But more than that, I'd learned how money moves, how it works, how it can be controlled. I understood trusts and accounts, joint ownerships and power of attorney arrangements. I knew how to protect assets and how to move them when necessary. Daniel had always struggled with money. Even as a child, he'd spend his allowance the day he got it, never quite grasping the concept of saving for something important. As an adult, it only got worse. Credit cards maxed out, car payments behind, student loans that followed him like a shadow. When he married Lisa 5 years ago, I hoped she'd bring some financial stability to his life. Instead, she brought expensive tastes and an even looser relationship with budgeting. They lived in a house they couldn't afford, drove cars that stretched their budget to the breaking point, and maintained a lifestyle that looked impressive from the outside, but was built on a foundation of debt and wishful thinking. More than once, I'd helped them out of financial tight spots. The down payment on their house. That was me. The unexpected medical bills when Lisa needed surgery. Me again. The loan when Daniel lost his job last year, my retirement fund, offered without hesitation, because that's what family does. But it wasn't just money I gave them. It was time, energy, love. I babysat their twin daughters Emma and Sophie every Friday night so they could have date nights. I hosted family dinners every Sunday, cooking elaborate meals that brought us all together. I attended every school play, every soccer game, every birthday party. I was the grandmother who showed up, who participated, who made myself available whenever they needed me. The girls were 8 now, bright and beautiful and full of the kind of energy that made me feel young again. Emma had my head for numbers, already doing multiplication in her head faster than kids twice her age. Sophie was creative, always drawing pictures, or making up stories that she'd perform with elaborate gestures. They called me Grandma Dot, and their faces lit up whenever I walked into a room. Which is why what happened on that February night felt like such a betrayal, not just of me, but of everything I thought we'd built together. The invitation came in early February, during one of those stretches of winter that makes you wonder if spring will ever arrive. Daniel called me on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I'd learned to recognize over the past year since Lisa's behavior toward me had started to change. "Mom, Lisa and I were talking and we'd love to have you come stay with us this weekend," he said, and I could hear cartoons playing in the background. The girls probably settled in for their evening routine. "We thought it would be nice to have some family time, maybe cook together, let the girls spend some real time with their grandmother." I should have been suspicious. Lisa hadn't initiated a family gathering in months, not since Christmas, when she'd made it clear that my gift-giving had been excessive and that perhaps I should consult with them before spending money on the girls. But I missed my granddaughters, missed the easy companionship Daniel and I used to share before marriage had complicated his loyalties. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I told him, meaning it despite the warning bells that were quietly ringing in the back of my mind. "Should I bring anything? I could make that pot roast the girls love, or maybe some of those cookies Sophie always asks for." "Just bring yourself, Mom. Lisa's got everything planned out. She's really excited about this weekend." Excited? That should have been my first clue that something was off. Lisa hadn't been excited about spending time with me in years, but I chose to believe that maybe she was making an effort, that perhaps we could finally bridge the gap that had been widening between us since she'd married my son. I spent Friday preparing, shopping for small gifts for the girls. Nothing excessive, just books I thought they'd enjoy, and some art supplies for Sophie's latest creative phase. I packed enough clothes for the weekend, including the warm pajamas Daniel had given me for Christmas. February in Minnesota was brutal, and their house had always run cold, something about the heating system that never quite worked properly despite multiple repair attempts. The drive to their suburban home in Bloomington took 45 minutes through streets lined with snow that had been accumulating for weeks. Their neighborhood was one of those planned communities where every house looked carefully different but somehow exactly the same, where young families with big mortgages tried to build the American dream one monthly payment at a time. Their house was a colonial revival with a 3-car garage and a front yard that would be beautiful in summer but looked stark and unwelcoming under the gray February sky. Daniel's truck was in the driveway next to Lisa's SUV, and I could see warm light glowing from the windows. For a moment, pulling into their driveway, I felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that came with family gatherings. The hope that this time would be different, that this time we'd recapture some of the closeness we'd lost. Daniel answered the door with a smile that seemed genuine, hugging me tightly against the cold. "Mom, you made it. Come in, it's freezing out there." The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, candles burning to create the kind of cozy atmosphere that Lisa excelled at. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the throw pillows on the cream-colored sectional to the family photos arranged just so on the mantelpiece. "Grandma Dot!" The girls came running from the family room, all arms and legs and unbridled enthusiasm. Emma crashed into me first, followed immediately by Sophie, and for a moment I was surrounded by the kind of unconditional love that makes everything else fade into background noise. "My beautiful girls," I said, holding them close and breathing in the scent of their shampoo, that particular smell of childhood that always made my heart ache with tenderness. "I've missed you so much." Lisa emerged from the kitchen wearing yoga pants and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 3 months. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had clearly taken considerable effort to achieve, and her makeup was flawless despite being at home on a Friday evening. "Dorothy," she said, offering me one of those air kisses that never quite made contact. "So good to see you, you look well." The pause before "well" was subtle but unmistakable, just long enough to suggest she was being charitable with the assessment. I chose to ignore the slight, focusing instead on the warmth of my granddaughters still clinging to my sides. "Thank you for having me, Lisa. Something smells absolutely wonderful." "Oh, I've been cooking all afternoon," she said with the kind of martyred pride that suggested I should be appropriately grateful for her effort. I wanted everything to be perfect for our family weekend. The evening started pleasantly enough. We had dinner around their formal dining table, the girls chattering about school and friends and the science project Emma was working on. Daniel seemed relaxed, more like the son I remembered from before his marriage had introduced complications I didn't fully understand. Even Lisa participated in the conversation, asking about my health, my neighbors, my garden, all the polite inquiries that suggested she was making an effort. But something felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite identify, a sense that everyone was performing, rather than simply being together. Lisa kept checking her phone, glancing at the time as if she was waiting for something. Daniel seemed nervous, making conversation that felt forced rather than natural. After dinner, we settled in the family room to watch a movie with the girls. It was one of those animated films I'd seen a dozen times, but never minded watching again because of the way Sophie would mouth, along with all the dialogue, and Emma would point out the mathematical impossibilities in the plot. I was comfortable on their sectional, the girls curled up on either side of me, when Lisa made her announcement. "Dorothy, I should probably mention that we're expecting some friends to stop by later tonight," she said casually, as if she was commenting on the weather. "The Andersons from Daniel's work. They're having some issues with their marriage, and we offered to let them stay here for a few days while they work things out." I looked up from the movie, surprised. "Oh, that's very kind of you. Should I plan to head home tomorrow instead of Sunday? I don't want to be in the way if you're helping friends through a difficult time." "Oh no, we want you to stay the whole weekend," Daniel said quickly, but there was something in his tone that didn't match his words. Well, we might need to shuffle some of the sleeping arrangements around." And there it was. The reason for Lisa's nervous energy, for Daniel's forced cheerfulness, for the careful way they'd both been watching me all evening. This wasn't about family time. This wasn't about the girls spending time with their grandmother. This was about creating a situation where my comfort would become secondary to their other obligations. "What kind of shuffling?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lisa's smile became more strained, and I watched her exchange one of those meaningful looks with Daniel that married couples perfect over years of silent communication. The kind of look that says, "You handle this," or "Stick to the plan," or "Remember what we discussed." "Well," Lisa began, her voice taking on that tone people use when they're about to explain why something unreasonable is actually perfectly logical, "the Andersons really need the guest room. Jennifer is pregnant, and Mark has been sleeping on couches for weeks. We thought you wouldn't mind taking the pull-out sofa in Daniel's office for one night." I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter outside. "The office sofa?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice neutral. Daniel's office was barely large enough for his desk and filing cabinets, let alone a comfortable place for someone my age to sleep. "It's actually quite comfortable," Daniel said quickly, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I've fallen asleep on it myself during busy seasons. And it's just for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out something better." The girls had gone quiet beside me, their attention divided between the movie and the conversation they were too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense the tension in. Emma's hand found mine, her small fingers intertwining with my wrinkled ones in a gesture that reminded me why I was here, why I put up with Lisa's increasingly obvious discomfort with my presence in their lives. "When are the Andersons arriving?" I asked, glancing at the clock on the cable box. It was already past 9, well beyond the time most people would show up unannounced at someone's house. "Actually," Lisa said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully, "they're already here. They're waiting in their car outside until we get the sleeping arrangements sorted out. They didn't want to impose until we had everything organized." They were waiting outside. In February. In Minnesota. While we had this conversation about where the 78-year-old grandmother would sleep so they could be comfortable in the guest room that I had helped furnish with money from my retirement fund, I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, searching his face for some sign of the boy who used to defend kids from bullies on the playground, who had once gotten in trouble at school for standing up to a teacher who was being unfair to a classmate. That boy wouldn't have let anyone treat his mother this way. But that boy had apparently been replaced by a man who was more concerned with keeping his wife happy than protecting his mother's dignity. "I see," I said quietly, and I did see. More clearly than I had in months. This wasn't about helping friends in crisis. This wasn't about unexpected circumstances or poor planning. This was about establishing a hierarchy, about making it clear that my comfort, my needs, my basic dignity were secondary to whatever Lisa decided was more important. The Andersons, when they finally came inside, were perfectly nice people in their early 30s who seemed genuinely embarrassed about the situation. Jennifer kept apologizing, saying they could find a hotel, that they didn't want to inconvenience anyone. Mark offered to help set up the office sofa, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of displacing an elderly woman from proper sleeping accommodations. "It's really no trouble," I heard myself saying, playing the role of the gracious grandmother who was happy to make sacrifices for the greater good. "I'm just grateful to spend time with my family." But as I said it, I was watching Lisa's face, noting the flash of satisfaction in her eyes when I acquiesced without further protest. She had gotten what she wanted. My compliance, my acceptance of being treated as less important than strangers, my willingness to absorb the inconvenience so she could play the role of generous hostess. The office sofa was exactly as uncomfortable as I had expected. It was one of those modern pieces that looked sleek but was designed more for aesthetics than actual sleeping. The cushions were too firm, the back too low, and no matter how I arranged myself, something was always digging into my hip or my shoulder or my neck. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional realization that was settling over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't the first time Lisa had maneuvered situations to put me in secondary positions. It was just the most blatant. Over the past year, there had been other incidents, smaller slights that I had excused or overlooked because I wanted to maintain peace in my son's family. The Christmas dinner where she had seated me at the card table with the children instead of the main dining table, claiming it would be more fun for me to eat with my granddaughters. The Easter gathering where she had given me a list of specific inexpensive items to bring, while telling her own mother to, "Just bring yourself, Mom, you've done enough." The graduation party for her nephew where she had introduced me to her friends as Daniel's mother, rather than by name, as if my identity existed only in relation to my son. Lying on that uncomfortable sofa, listening to the sounds of the Andersons settling into the guest room that should have been mine, I finally understood what had been happening. This wasn't about a single night of poor sleeping arrangements. This was about Lisa systematically reducing my importance in my son's life, training him to see my needs as optional, my comfort as expendable. The house grew quiet around midnight, but sleep eluded me completely. Every time I shifted position, the sofa cushions made noise that seemed thunderous in the silence. My back ached, my neck was stiff, and the room was cold despite the space heater Daniel had brought in. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and I could hear the occasional crack of branches weighted down with ice. Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep and made my way quietly to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house felt different in the darkness, less welcoming somehow. Family photos lined the hallway, documenting years of holidays and vacations and milestones. I paused at one from last summer's family reunion, studying the faces of my children and grandchildren, trying to remember when I had started feeling like an outsider in my own family. The kitchen was modern and expensive, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that gleamed even in the dim light from the under-cabinet LEDs. Lisa took pride in this room, often posting photos of her elaborate meals on social media, playing the role of the perfect wife and mother. But standing there in my pajamas at 2 a.m, unable to sleep because of her manipulations, I saw it differently. I saw the kitchen I had helped pay for, filled with appliances I had contributed to, in a house that existed because of my financial support. I was pouring my water when I heard voices from upstairs. Not loud enough to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Lisa and Daniel were having a heated conversation about something. I shouldn't have listened, but something made me stay still, straining to catch fragments of what they were saying. "Can't keep doing this." That was Daniel's voice, frustrated and tired. "She expects too much." Lisa's response was sharper, more defensive. "She's my mother, Lisa. She's done everything for us. And we're grateful, but there have to be boundaries." I couldn't make out the rest, but I'd heard enough. They were arguing about me, about my presence in their lives, about what I expected, about boundaries that apparently needed to be established. I stood in their kitchen, drinking water from a glass I had given them as a housewarming gift, listening to my son and his wife debate my place in their family, as if I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything. I woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon that should have been comforting but instead felt like a mockery of family togetherness. My entire body ached from the night on the office sofa, and I felt every one of my 78 years as I made my way to the bathroom to try to make myself presentable. When I finally emerged, showered and dressed but still feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, I found Daniel alone in the kitchen, staring into his coffee cup with an expression I couldn't read. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up. "How did you sleep?" "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, noting that he flinched slightly at my honesty. "Where is everyone?" "Lisa took the girls to their soccer games. The Andersons left early. Jennifer wasn't feeling well." He paused, finally meeting my eyes. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Something in his tone made me sit down across from him, setting my coffee cup carefully on the table. "What is it, sweetheart?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the ceramic mug in a nervous rhythm I remembered from his childhood. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There are no Andersons." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside my chest crack open. "What do you mean? Mark and Jennifer Anderson. They don't exist." "Well, they exist, but they're not having marriage problems. And they weren't supposed to stay here." Daniel's face was flushed with shame, and he couldn't look at me directly. "Lisa hired them. She paid them to come here and pretend to need the guest room so you'd have to sleep on the office sofa." The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what my son had just told me. "She hired actors?" "Mark works at her gym. Jennifer is a friend of hers from book club. Lisa offered them $200 to come here and play the part of friends in crisis." Daniel's voice was getting smaller with each word. "She wanted to see if you'd complain, if you'd demand better treatment, or just accept whatever she decided to give you." I stared at my son, this man I had raised, this person I had sacrificed for and supported and loved unconditionally for 38 years. "And you went along with this?" "I didn't know about it until this morning," he said quickly. "Jennifer told me the truth when they were leaving. She felt terrible about it, said she didn't know it was supposed to be some kind of test. She thought Lisa was just trying to help out some friends. A test. Lisa had orchestrated an elaborate deception to test whether I would accept being treated poorly. And I had failed her test by being gracious about it, by absorbing the inconvenience without complaint, by playing the role of the accommodating grandmother who was grateful for whatever scraps of consideration she was offered. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what were you planning to do with this information?" He looked up at me then, and I saw the boy he had been, the child who had once confessed to breaking a lamp rather than let his sister take the blame. "I was going to tell you. I am telling you. I couldn't let you think that what happened last night was just bad luck or poor planning. But what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air, and I watched my son struggle with it. I could see the conflict in his face, the war between his loyalty to his wife and his guilt over what had been done to his mother. In that moment, I realized that Daniel was as much a victim of Lisa's manipulations as I was. She had been systematically isolating him from his family, training him to see conflicts between his wife and mother as problems he needed to solve rather than boundaries he needed to enforce. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I love her, Mom. But what she did, it's not okay. It's cruel and it's manipulative. And it makes me wonder what other things she's done that I don't know about." I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses from his construction work, remembering when those hands had been small enough to fit completely in mine. "Sweetheart, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about one night of sleeping on an uncomfortable sofa. This is about respect. This is about whether I'm treated like family or like a burden to be managed." "You're not a burden, Mom. I'm what?" I interrupted gently. "I'm the woman who raised you. I'm the grandmother who loves your children. I'm the person who has helped you financially whenever you needed it." Then why is your wife conducting psychological experiments to see how much disrespect I'll tolerate? Daniel had no answer for that, and his silence told me everything I needed to know. He understood what had happened, but he wasn't prepared to take a stand against it. He was hoping I would be understanding, forgiving, willing to overlook this latest humiliation in the interest of family harmony. But something had shifted in me during that long, sleepless night on the office sofa. Something had crystallized as I lay there listening to the wind and the branches and the sound of my son arguing with his wife about the burden of his mother's presence in their lives. Paytas. I was done being understanding. I was done absorbing other people's manipulations. I was done pretending that love meant accepting unacceptable treatment. Lisa returned an hour later with the girls, her face bright with artificial cheerfulness, as she bustled into the kitchen with coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery. "I thought we could have a special brunch," she announced, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't spent the previous evening orchestrating my humiliation for sport. "How thoughtful," I said, standing up and smoothing my sweater. "Actually, I think I'm going to head home a bit early today. I have some things I need to take care of." Lisa's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, but we were hoping to spend more time together. The girls were looking forward to doing some crafts this afternoon." "I'm sure they were," I said, leaning down to hug Emma and Sophie, breathing in their sweetness one more time. "But Grandma has some important business to attend to." As I gathered my things and loaded my car, I could feel Daniel watching me from the window. I knew he was waiting for some sign that I forgave him, that I understood his impossible position, that I would continue to be the accommodating mother who absorbed whatever treatment his wife decided to dish out. But as I drove away from their house, through the suburban streets lined with snow and the careful dreams of people who thought they had everything figured out, I was already planning. Lisa wanted to test my limits. She wanted to see how I would respond to being treated as expendable. She was about to find out that testing a woman who had spent 45 years managing other people's financial lives was a very dangerous game to play. And unlike her little experiment with fake house guests, my test was going to have consequences that would last a lot longer than one uncomfortable night. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. The drive home from Daniel's house felt like traveling through more than just the frozen Minnesota landscape. With every mile that passed, I felt myself shedding the role I'd been playing for years: the grateful grandmother, the accommodating mother-in-law, the woman who absorbed disrespect with a smile, because keeping peace was more important than demanding dignity. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I wasn't that woman anymore. My house in St. Paul was a modest 2-story craftsman that I'd bought 15 years ago, when I'd finally saved enough for something that was truly mine. No mortgage, no debt, just a home that belonged entirely to Dorothy Mitchell. The contrast with Daniel's over-leveraged suburban palace wasn't lost on me as I sat in my paid-off car looking at my debt-free house, understanding for perhaps the first time the true extent of the power I'd been allowing others to overlook. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a stack of financial documents that I kept in a fireproof safe in my home office. For 45 years, I had managed other people's money, helped them build wealth, taught them how to leverage assets and protect themselves from financial vulnerability. It was time to apply those same skills to my own situation. The first thing I did was make a comprehensive list of every financial contribution I had made to Daniel and Lisa's life over the past 5 years. My memory for numbers had always been precise, a necessity in my profession, and the totals were staggering even to me. The down payment on their house, $85,000. Not a loan, but a gift, because I wanted my son to have the stability I'd fought to build for myself. Lisa's medical bills when her insurance hadn't covered her surgery, $23,000. Again, not a loan. I'd paid the hospital directly because I didn't want them starting their marriage with crushing debt. The loan when Daniel lost his job last year, $47,000. This one was technically supposed to be repaid, though they'd made exactly 2 payments before the subject simply stopped coming up in our conversations. Car repairs, emergency expenses, the twins' private school tuition when they decided the public schools weren't good enough, Christmas gifts, birthday parties. Family vacations I'd subsidized so they could make memories without financial stress. The total came to just over $200,000 in 5 years. $200,000. Enough to buy a nice house outright in many parts of the country. Enough to fund a comfortable retirement for someone who hadn't been as careful with money as I had been. Enough to command a certain level of respect and consideration from the people who had benefited from my generosity. But it wasn't just the money that gave me power. It was how that money was structured, how it moved through accounts and investments that I understood better than anyone else in my family. You see, when you spend 45 years as a financial advisor, you learn to protect yourself. You learn to maintain control, even when you're being generous. You learn that trust is good, but verification is better. That evening, I called my oldest friend and former colleague, Patricia Rodriguez. Patricia had been my partner at Henderson Financial for 20 years before starting her own firm, and she understood both the technical and emotional complexities of family money better than anyone I knew. "Dorothy," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure when she heard it was me. "It's been too long. How are you holding up in this brutal winter?" "I've been better, Patty," I said, using the nickname she'd allowed only her closest friends to use. "I need some advice. Professional and personal. You've got my full attention. What's going on?" I told her everything. The pattern of disrespect, the hired actors, Daniel's failure to protect me, Lisa's systematic campaign to reduce my importance in my son's life. Patricia listened without interrupting, making the occasional sound of sympathy or outrage, but mostly just absorbing the full scope of what I was dealing with. "That manipulative little," Patricia paused, clearly editing herself. "I'm sorry, Dorothy. I know she's your daughter-in-law, but what kind of person pays actors to humiliate an elderly family member?" "The kind of person who's forgotten that actions have consequences," I said. "Which brings me to why I'm calling. I need to understand my options, financial options." "Ah," Patricia said, and I could hear the shift in her tone as she moved from friend mode to professional mode. "Let's talk about leverage." We spent the next hour going through my financial relationship with Daniel and Lisa, examining every account, every contribution, every legal document that connected my money to their lifestyle. What we discovered was that I had far more control than they realized, and far more ability to influence their financial situation than they had ever considered. The house, for instance. While my $85,000 had been a gift for the down payment, I had insisted on being added to the deed as a co-owner for estate planning purposes. At the time, Daniel and Lisa had been grateful for this arrangement because it meant the house would pass to them without probate complications if something happened to me. They hadn't considered what it meant for my ability to influence decisions about the property. The loan I'd given Daniel when he lost his job hadn't been a casual handshake agreement. I'd insisted on proper documentation, with clear terms for repayment and specific consequences for default. The paperwork was sitting in my safe, along with Daniel's signature acknowledging the debt. More importantly, over the years, I had become deeply integrated into their financial infrastructure. I was a co-signer on their primary checking account, a backup name on their savings account, and the primary beneficiary on several investment accounts that I'd helped them establish. These weren't just gifts. They were financial relationships that gave me both visibility and influence. "Dorothy," Patricia said carefully, "you realize what you're sitting on here, don't you? You've essentially become their silent financial partner. If you wanted to make their lives complicated, you have multiple ways to do it legally and ethically." "I'm not trying to destroy them, Patty. I'm trying to teach them something about respect and consequences. There's a difference." "I understand. But you need to be very careful about how you proceed. Family and money are a volatile combination, and once you start pulling financial strings, it's hard to undo the damage to relationships." "The relationship is already damaged," I said firmly. "Lisa has seen to that. The question is whether I'm going to continue allowing myself to be treated as disposable by people who owe their entire lifestyle to my generosity." Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her thinking through the implications of what I was considering. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I had been thinking about that question all afternoon, turning over possibilities in my mind like pieces of a complex puzzle. The answer, when it came to me, was both elegant and appropriate. "I'm going to freeze their access to the financial foundation I've provided," I said. "Not permanently, not destructively, but long enough for them to understand what their lives would look like without my support. How? By exercising my legal rights as a co-owner and creditor. By making them experience what financial insecurity feels like. By showing them that taking my contributions for granted was a mistake they can't afford to make. The next morning, I drove to my bank and met with the manager, a woman named Carol Jensen who had handled my accounts for years and understood the extent of my assets. I explained what I needed to do, and while she raised her eyebrows at some of my requests, everything I was asking for was completely legal and within my rights as an account holder. First, I exercised my authority as co-owner of Daniel and Lisa's primary checking account to place a temporary freeze on large transactions. As a co-owner, I had the right to require dual signatures for any withdrawals over $500. This wouldn't prevent them from buying groceries or paying for gas, but it would stop them from making their mortgage payment, car payments, or any other significant expenses without my approval. Second, I called in the loan I'd made to Daniel when he lost his job. The documentation was clear. Payment was due on demand, and I was demanding it. All $47,000, with the accumulated interest they'd never bothered to calculate. Third, I began the legal process to convert my co-ownership of their house from joint tenancy to tenancy in common, which would give me the right to force a sale of the property if necessary. This was a nuclear option I hoped I wouldn't need to use, but I wanted them to understand that their security wasn't as guaranteed as they'd assumed. Finally, I liquidated several investment accounts that I'd established for the twins' college funds, moving the money into accounts that only I controlled. The funds would still be there for Emma and Sophie's education, but Daniel and Lisa would no longer have any access to or influence over how that money was managed. Carol processed each request with professional efficiency, though I could see her curiosity about what had prompted such dramatic actions. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said as we finished the paperwork, "I hope you know what you're doing. These kinds of financial maneuvers can have serious consequences for family relationships." The consequences for my family relationships started when my daughter-in-law decided to treat me like a disposable nuisance, I replied. "I'm simply making sure that the financial consequences match the emotional ones." As I drove home from the bank, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. For too long, I had allowed other people to determine the terms of our relationships, to decide how much respect I deserved, to treat my contributions as entitlements rather than gifts. That dynamic was about to change dramatically. My phone was ringing when I walked into my house. The caller ID showed Daniel's number, and I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, I picked up. "Mom!" Daniel's voice was strained, confused. "I'm at the bank, and they're telling me there's some kind of problem with our account. They're saying we need your signature for our mortgage payment. What's going on?" I settled into my favorite chair, the one by the window where I could watch the snow falling on my peaceful, debt-free property. "What's going on, sweetheart, is that I've decided to exercise some of my legal rights as your financial partner." "What legal rights? What are you talking about?" "The rights that come with being a co-owner of your checking account. The rights that come with having made significant financial contributions to your lifestyle. The rights that come with being treated like family instead of like hired help." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more uncertain than I'd heard it in years. "Mom, are you saying you're cutting off our access to our own money?" "I'm saying that I'm requiring my approval for significant financial transactions, which is my legal right as a co-owner of the account. I'm also calling in the loan I made to you last year, which is my legal right as your creditor. These aren't punitive measures, Daniel, they're consequences." "Consequences for what?" "For allowing your wife to conduct psychological experiments on your mother. For failing to protect me when I needed protection. For taking my financial support for granted while treating my emotional needs as optional." Another long silence. Then, "Mom, please. We can work this out. We can talk about what happened this weekend. Lisa feels terrible about the whole thing." "Does she?" "Because from where I sit, Lisa feels terrible about getting caught, not about what she did. There's a significant difference. What do you want from us?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about since I'd left their house the previous morning. What did I want? An apology? A guarantee that I'd be treated better in the future? A promise that Lisa would stop her manipulative games? All of those things, certainly. But more than that, I wanted them to understand that respect isn't optional. That love isn't measured by how much disrespect someone is willing to tolerate. And that financial generosity doesn't come with an obligation to accept emotional cruelty. I want you to understand the value of what I've given you, I said finally. Not just the money, Daniel, but the love and support and sacrifice. I want you to understand that taking those things for granted has consequences. And I want your wife to learn that manipulating elderly family members for sport is not acceptable behavior. How long is this going to last? Until I'm convinced that the lesson has been learned. I hung up and turned off my phone, settling back in my chair to watch the snow and think about the conversation I'd just had. In the distance, I could see my neighbors going about their normal Saturday routines, shoveling driveways and walking dogs and living their uncomplicated lives. Tomorrow, I suspected, Daniel and Lisa's life would become significantly more complicated. But sometimes complications are necessary. Sometimes the only way to teach people to value what they have is to show them what life looks like without it. The financial education of Daniel and Lisa Mitchell was about to begin, and their first lesson was already underway. The weekend passed in blissful silence. I kept my phone turned off, tended to my houseplants, read a novel I'd been meaning to finish for months, and enjoyed the peculiar peace that comes from knowing you've finally stopped accepting unacceptable behavior. Outside, the Minnesota winter continued its relentless assault on the landscape, but inside my warm, debt-free home, I felt more centered than I had in years. Monday morning brought reality crashing back in the form of 17 missed calls and a dozen increasingly frantic voicemails. I made myself a proper breakfast, something I rarely took time for anymore, and sat down with my coffee to listen to the messages that had accumulated over the weekend. The first few were from Daniel, his voice progressing from confused to concerned to genuinely panicked as he realized the scope of what I had done. "Mom, please call me back. We couldn't make our mortgage payment. The car dealership is asking for their monthly payment and we can't access enough money. Please, we need to talk." Then came Lisa's voice, and I was surprised to hear her on my voicemail at all. In 5 years of marriage to my son, she had never once called me directly. Her tone was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath her practiced politeness. "Dorothy, this is Lisa. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding at the bank. Could you please call us when you get this message? We're having some technical difficulties with our accounts, and we'd really appreciate your help sorting this out." Technical difficulties. As if my deliberate actions were some kind of computer glitch that could be explained away with a phone call to customer service. The messages continued throughout the weekend, Daniel's voice becoming more desperate, Lisa's more angry, though she tried to mask it with increasingly thin veneers of courtesy. By Sunday night, they had apparently realized that this wasn't a banking error or a misunderstanding. This was intentional, calculated, and completely within my legal rights. The final message was from Daniel, recorded at nearly midnight on Sunday. His voice was hoarse, exhausted, and for the first time, genuinely humble. "Mom, I know you're angry. I know we messed up. Lisa told me what she did with the actors, about the test, about everything. Please call me back. We need to figure out how to fix this. Not just the money stuff, but all of it. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really, really sorry." I saved that message. After breakfast, I called my lawyer, Harrison Blake, who had handled my estate planning and business affairs for over a decade. Harrison was a man in his early 60s who understood both the legal complexities of family finances and the emotional toll they could take on relationships. "Dorothy," he said when his secretary put me through, "Patricia Rodriguez called me this morning. She said you might need some legal guidance regarding family financial matters?" "I might," I agreed. "How much did Patricia tell you?" "Enough to know that you've taken some significant steps to protect your financial interests. She also mentioned that these steps might have caught your family by surprise." I explained the situation in detail, from Lisa's manipulative behavior to my weekend at Daniel's house to the financial measures I'd implemented. Harrison listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions about documentation or legal structures. "From a legal standpoint," he said when I finished, "everything you've done is completely within your rights. The co-ownership agreements, the loan documentation, the investment account management. It's all properly structured and legally enforceable. And from a practical standpoint? Harrison was quiet for a moment. From a practical standpoint, you've created a situation where your family is going to be forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about their financial dependence on you. The question is whether you're prepared for the fallout. What kind of fallout? Well, they can't make their mortgage payment without your approval. Their car loans are probably in jeopardy. Any automatic payments they have set up for utilities, insurance, credit cards, all of that is going to start failing if they can't access sufficient funds from their primary account. I hadn't considered the cascading effects of my actions, the way that freezing their access to large amounts would ripple through every aspect of their financial lives. How long before things get serious? Depends on their other resources, but most people don't have significant cash reserves sitting around. I'd guess they have maybe a week before they start getting late notices, 2 weeks before more serious consequences kick in. And if I maintain the freeze, eventually they'll default on major obligations, the mortgage, car payments, probably several credit accounts. Their credit rating will tank. They could lose the house, the cars. Dorothy, what you've done is legal, but it has the potential to be financially devastating for them. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, like a heavy blanket. I had wanted to teach them a lesson about respect and consequences. But I hadn't fully considered how far those consequences might extend. The difference between a wake-up call and financial destruction was thinner than I had realized. How long do I have to decide how far to take this? I asked. Most mortgage companies and car loan companies have grace periods before they initiate serious collection actions. You probably have 2 to 3 weeks before any permanent damage is done. But Dorothy, I have to ask, what's your end game here? What outcome would make you feel like this was worthwhile? It was the same question Daniel had asked me on the phone, and I still didn't have a complete answer. I wanted respect. I wanted acknowledgement of what I had contributed to their lives. I wanted Lisa to understand that treating family members cruelly had consequences. I wanted Daniel to find his spine and start protecting the people who had protected him. But how much financial pressure would it take to achieve those goals? And was I prepared to risk my relationship with my granddaughters to make my point? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know I'm not ready to back down. Monday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was in my home office, reviewing some investment statements, when I heard a car in my driveway. Through the window I saw Lisa's white SUV and my stomach tightened with anticipation. This was the first time she had ever come to my house alone. I took my time answering the door, giving myself a moment to prepare for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Lisa stood on my front porch looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her makeup was minimal, and she was wearing jeans and a basic sweater instead of her usual carefully curated outfits. "Dorothy," she said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I stepped aside to let her in, noting how she looked around my modest living room with new eyes. I wondered if she was seeing it differently, now that she understood the extent of my financial resources. Now that she realized the woman she'd been dismissing lived debt-free, while she and Daniel were leveraged to the hilt. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "No thank you." Lisa perched on the edge of my sofa like she was ready to flee at any moment. "I think we both know why I'm here. I assume it has something to do with your banking difficulties." Lisa's composure cracked slightly. "Our banking difficulties? Dorothy, you've frozen our accounts. We can't pay our bills. We can't buy groceries. Daniel had to borrow money from his foreman just to put gas in his truck to get to work." I settled into my reading chair, maintaining the calm demeanor I'd perfected during decades of difficult client meetings. "You can buy groceries, Lisa. You can put gas in your truck. The freeze only applies to transactions over $500. Our mortgage payment is $2,800 a month. Our car payments are another $800. Our insurance premiums, the girls' school tuition, the utility bills, everything we need to pay to maintain our lives requires your signature now." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly right." Lisa stared at me for a moment, and I could see her struggling to find the right approach. The polite, condescending tone she usually used with me clearly wasn't going to work in this situation. She needed something from me now, and we both knew it. "What do you want?" she asked finally, abandoning pretense entirely. "I want you to understand what you've done," I said quietly. Not just last weekend, but over the past year. I want you to acknowledge that your behavior toward me has been cruel and manipulative. And I want some assurance that it's going to change. Okay, Lisa said quickly. I understand. I was wrong about the actor thing, and I'm sorry. It was a stupid idea, and I shouldn't have done it. Can we move past this now? I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse rather than just expedience. Lisa, do you remember the Christmas dinner where you seated me at the card table with the children? She looked confused by the change of subject. I thought you'd enjoy eating with Emma and Sophie. Do you remember Easter, when you told your mother to just bring herself, while giving me a specific list of side dishes to prepare? I was trying to make sure we had enough food for everyone. Do you remember introducing me to your friends as Daniel's mother instead of by name? Lisa's face was starting to flush. I don't remember doing that. I do. I remember all of it, Lisa, because each incident was part of a pattern. You've been systematically reducing my importance in my son's life, training him to see my needs as optional, my comfort as expendable. The actor situation wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of months of similar behavior. I wasn't trying to... Lisa stopped, her carefully constructed denials falling apart under examination. Okay, maybe I have been competitive about Daniel's attention. Maybe I felt threatened by how close you two are. And how did you decide to handle that feeling? Lisa was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisted in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I tried to make you less important. I tried to show Daniel that I should come first, that my needs mattered more than yours. It was more honesty than I had expected from her, and I felt some of my anger beginning to soften. Not disappear, but transform into something more manageable. And how did that work out for you? I asked. Obviously not very well, considering I'm sitting here begging you to unfreeze our bank accounts. I leaned forward in my chair, meeting her eyes directly. Lisa, I'm not your enemy. I don't want to compete with you for Daniel's love. There's room in his life for both his wife and his mother. But there has to be mutual respect. There have to be boundaries that don't get crossed. What kind of boundaries? The kind that say you don't conduct psychological experiments on family members. The kind that say everyone's comfort matters, not just yours. The kind that say treating people with basic human dignity isn't optional, even when it's inconvenient. Lisa nodded, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong. But Dorothy, if you don't restore our account access, we're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, maybe even Daniel's job if this affects his credit rating. I'm not trying to destroy your lives, I said. I'm trying to save our relationship before it's completely damaged. But Lisa, you need to understand that going forward, things are going to be different. I'm not going to continue being the accommodating grandmother who absorbs whatever treatment you decide to dish out. What does that mean practically? I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a piece of paper I had spent Sunday evening preparing. It was a simple document, typed and printed, outlining the terms under which I would restore their financial access. It means we're going to have some new family rules, I said, handing her the paper. Written ones, so there's no confusion about expectations going forward. Lisa read the document quickly, her eyebrows rising as she took in the contents. The terms were straightforward but non-negotiable. Respectful treatment of all family members, consultation before making decisions that affected family gatherings, and formal acknowledgement of my financial contributions to their lifestyle. This is, she started, then stopped. This is like a contract. It is a contract, I confirmed, because apparently informal expectations of decent behavior aren't sufficient. If you want my continued financial support, these are the terms. Lisa stared at the paper for several minutes, and I could practically see her weighing her options. Pride versus practicality. Independence versus financial security. The illusion of control versus the reality of dependence. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect in her eyes. You're tougher than I thought. I'm exactly as tough as I've always been, I replied. You just never bothered to notice because it was convenient to see me as weak. If I sign this, will you restore our account access? If you sign it and mean it, yes. But Lisa, this isn't just about signatures on paper. This is about fundamental changes in how our family operates. If you agree to these terms and then go back to your old behavior, the consequences will be much more severe than frozen bank accounts." She signed the document without further discussion, her signature neat and decisive. As she handed it back to me, she asked, "What happens now?" "Now we call the bank and restore your access, and then we see whether you meant what you just signed, or whether this was just expedient paperwork to solve a temporary problem." As I walked Lisa to the door, she turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dorothy, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you been planning this? The financial freeze, the contracts, all of it?" I considered the question. "I've been planning it since the moment I realized that being generous and accommodating had taught you to see me as weak and disposable. Sometimes the only way to get people's attention is to show them what their lives would look like without the things they take for granted." Lisa nodded slowly. "Well, you definitely got our attention." After she left, I called the bank and authorized the restoration of Daniel and Lisa's account access. Then I sat in my quiet house and wondered whether I had just solved a problem or simply postponed it. Only time would tell whether Lisa's signature on my contract represented genuine change or just temporary compliance. But either way, the dynamic in our family had shifted permanently. I was no longer the accommodating grandmother who could be manipulated and dismissed. I was Dorothy Mitchell, a woman with resources and boundaries and the willingness to enforce both. And that, I thought, was a lesson worth teaching. The weeks following Lisa's signature on my contract passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Daniel went to work, Lisa managed the household, the twins attended their activities, and family life resumed its regular rhythm. But underneath, I could sense everyone walking carefully, testing the boundaries of our new arrangement like swimmers checking the temperature of unfamiliar water. The first real test came 3 weeks later, when Lisa called to invite me to Emma's school science fair. "Dorothy, Emma's project made it to the final round of judging," she said, her voice carrying a warmth I hadn't heard in months. "She'd really love to have you there to see her presentation." "Of course I'll be there," I replied, touched that my granddaughter had specifically asked for me. "What time should I arrive?" "Well, that's the thing. The fair starts at 6, but there's a reception for family members beforehand at 5:30. It's in the school library, and—" Lisa paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "I was wondering if you might like to sit with us at the main judging table. As Emma's grandmother, you'd be welcome in the family section." It was a small gesture, but significant. In the past, I would have been relegated to the general audience, while Lisa's parents occupied the prominent family seating. This invitation represented exactly the kind of inclusion that had been missing from our relationship. "I'd be honored," I said, meaning it. The science fair was held in the school gymnasium, transformed for the evening with colorful banners and carefully arranged display tables. Emma's project on renewable energy sources was impressive for an 8-year-old. Complete with working solar panel demonstrations and a wind turbine model she'd built herself. Watching her explain the principles of clean energy to the judges, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the financial and emotional battles that had consumed our family in recent weeks. "She gets that analytical mind from you," Daniel said quietly, standing beside me as we watched Emma field questions from the panel. Even as a toddler, she wanted to know how everything worked. It was the first time he'd acknowledged any positive inheritance I might have passed to his children, the first time he'd connected my professional skills to Emma's emerging talents. For years, Lisa had made it clear that any praise for the twins' accomplishments should be directed toward their immediate family, as if acknowledging my influence somehow diminished their parenting. "She's remarkable," I agreed. "Both girls are. You and Lisa should be very proud." Lisa, who had been adjusting Emma's display boards, looked up at the mention of her name. Instead of the defensive posture I'd grown accustomed to, she smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Emma insisted on wearing the lab coat you gave her for Christmas," she said. "She told everyone that her grandmother is a numbers scientist, and that's why she wanted to study energy efficiency." Numbers scientist. I had to smile at Emma's 8-year-old interpretation of my career in financial analysis. But there was something deeper in Lisa's comment, an acknowledgement that I had a meaningful relationship with the twins that existed independent of her approval. The evening progressed smoothly, with none of the subtle tensions that had characterized family gatherings for months. When Emma's project won second place in her age division, Lisa was the first to suggest we celebrate with ice cream, and she specifically asked me to choose the restaurant. As we sat around a table at the local dairy bar, watching the twins argue good-naturedly about the superiority of chocolate versus vanilla, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: the simple pleasure of being an included, valued member of my family. But the real test of our new dynamic came 2 weeks later, when Lisa called with a request that would have been unthinkable under our old arrangement. "Dorothy, I need to ask you for a favor," she said, her voice hesitant but determined. "My sister Jennifer is getting married next month in Chicago, and Daniel and I would love to attend. But it's a 3-day weekend, and we can't really afford both the travel expenses and a babysitter for that long." I waited, curious to see how she would frame her request. "I was wondering if you might be willing to stay with the girls, not just babysit for an evening, but actually stay here in our house for the weekend. Be their primary caregiver while we're gone." It was a significant ask, the kind of responsibility that demonstrated genuine trust in my capabilities and judgment. More importantly, it was an acknowledgement that I was family in the truest sense. Someone who could be relied upon for the important things, not just the convenient ones. "I'd be delighted," I said. "The girls and I will have a wonderful time together." "There's one more thing," Lisa continued, her voice growing more uncertain. "The weekend is going to be expensive, even with staying at a budget hotel. The flights, the rental car, the wedding gift, the rehearsal dinner. Daniel's been picking up overtime shifts, but we're still looking at about $1,500 we don't really have in our discretionary budget." She wasn't directly asking me for money, but the implication was clear. Under our old dynamic, she would never have admitted financial stress to me, preferring to maintain the illusion that they had everything under control. This honesty represented a significant shift in our relationship. "Would it help if I contributed to the trip?" I offered. "As a gift, not a loan. I'd love to help you celebrate Jennifer's wedding." The relief in Lisa's voice was palpable. "Dorothy, that would be incredibly generous. But only if you're comfortable with it. I don't want you to feel like we're taking advantage of your kindness." That phrase, "taking advantage of your kindness," told me more about Lisa's changed perspective than any formal apology could have. She was finally acknowledging that my financial contributions were gifts to be appreciated, not entitlements to be expected. "It would be my pleasure," I assured her. "Family helps family, especially for special occasions." The weekend of their Chicago trip turned out to be one of the most enjoyable I'd spent in years. Without the subtle tensions that Lisa's presence sometimes created, the girls and I fell into an easy rhythm of activities and conversations that reminded me why I'd wanted to be involved in their lives in the first place. On Saturday morning, Emma asked if I could help her with a math project that was frustrating her. As we worked through the problems together at their kitchen table, I realized this was the first time I'd been asked to contribute my professional expertise to my granddaughter's education. In the past, Lisa had always handled homework supervision, as if my decades of experience with numbers and analysis weren't relevant to a child's learning. "Grandma, Emma said as we finished the last problem. Mom told me you used to help people manage their money for their whole job. Is that why you're so good at math?" "Math was always one of my strengths," I agreed. "But more than that, I learned how to solve problems by breaking them down into smaller pieces, just like we did with your homework." Sophie, not to be outdone by her sister's academic pursuits, asked if I could help her organize a fashion show using clothes from her dress-up box. We spent Sunday afternoon creating elaborate costumes and staging dramatic presentations in their living room, complete with music and commentary that had us both dissolving into giggles. These were the kinds of simple, precious moments that I'd been missing during the months of family tension. Not elaborate outings or expensive activities, but the comfortable intimacy of being truly welcomed into my granddaughter's world. When Daniel and Lisa returned from Chicago on Sunday evening, they found us in the kitchen making homemade pizza for dinner, flour in our hair, sauce on our aprons, and the kind of chaotic joy that comes from cooking together without worrying about perfect results. "Looks like you three had quite an adventure," Daniel said, setting down their luggage and accepting hugs from daughters who were eager to tell him everything they'd done in his absence. "Grandma taught me a new way to do long division," Emma announced proudly. And she helped Sophie make a puppet theater out of a cardboard box. And we made pancakes shaped like animals for breakfast yesterday, Sophie added. Grandma Dot can make a pancake elephant that actually looks like an elephant. I watched Lisa take in the scene, her daughters animated and happy, their weekend projects displayed proudly around the kitchen, the comfortable domesticity that suggested I'd been a capable and caring guardian in their absence. For a moment, I wondered if she might feel threatened by the obvious bond between the girls and me, if this evidence of my successful weekend might trigger her old competitive instincts. Instead, she smiled with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. It sounds like you all had a wonderful time, Dorothy. Thank you so much for taking such good care of them. And for making our trip possible. Thank you for trusting me with them, I replied. They're remarkable girls, and spending this kind of quality time with them has been a gift. Later that evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed with elaborate recountings of their weekend adventures, Lisa and I sat in their living room with cups of tea while Daniel unpacked their suitcases upstairs. The wedding was beautiful, Lisa said, showing me photos on her phone of the ceremony and reception. Jennifer looked radiant, and it was wonderful to see my whole family together. But Dorothy, I have to tell you, the whole weekend, I kept thinking about how different this felt from our usual family interactions. Different how? Honest, she said simply. I didn't have to pretend we had money we don't have, or maintain some facade of perfect financial control. When people asked about our lives, I could be genuine about our challenges and our blessings. It was refreshing. I studied her face, looking for signs that this was just another manipulation, another performance designed to achieve a specific goal. But what I saw was something I'd rarely witnessed from Lisa before. Vulnerability without agenda, honesty without calculation. I think, she continued, that part of my problem with you before was that I felt like I had to compete with you financially. You were so generous, so capable, so obviously successful, and I felt like Daniel was constantly comparing our financial struggles to your security. Was he making those comparisons? Lisa shook her head. Not really. I think I was making them for him. I was so insecure about our money problems that I interpreted every kind gesture from you as a reminder of our inadequacy. And instead of being grateful for your help, I resented it. It was more self-awareness than I had expected from her, and more honesty about her motivations than she had ever shared with me before. And now? I asked. Now I'm trying to see your generosity for what it actually is. Love expressed through action. And I'm trying to appreciate that instead of feeling threatened by it. She paused, looking down at her hands wrapped around her tea mug. The contract you made me sign. I was angry about it at first. It felt controlling and punitive. But I've been thinking about it, and I realize that everything on that list is just basic respect that I should have been showing you all along. The contract isn't meant to be permanent, I said gently. It's meant to establish a foundation of mutual respect that we can build on. I know. And I think we might actually be building something good here. Something that works for all of us. As I drove home that night through the quiet suburban streets, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. The financial pressure I'd applied had been the catalyst, but the real transformation was happening in the space between crisis and resolution, in the careful reconstruction of trust and respect that both sides had to choose daily. Lisa's willingness to be vulnerable, to acknowledge her mistakes, and to accept help without resentment, suggested that the lesson I'd tried to teach had taken root in ways I hadn't expected. But I also knew that change was fragile, that old patterns could reassert themselves under stress, and that maintaining our new dynamic would require ongoing attention from all of us. The question was whether this progress would survive the next test. And in families as complicated as ours, there was always a next test waiting. 3 months into our new arrangement, I thought we had turned a corner. Lisa's behavior had been consistently respectful, Daniel seemed more relaxed during our conversations, and my relationship with the twins had deepened in ways that felt natural and sustainable. I was beginning to believe that the harsh lesson I'd taught had genuinely transformed our family dynamics for the better. Then came the phone call that shattered my cautious optimism. It was a Tuesday evening in late May when my phone rang with Daniel's number. I answered, expecting one of our increasingly comfortable weekly check-ins, but the voice that greeted me was strained with barely controlled panic. "Mom, we have a problem. A big one." I set down my book and gave him my full attention. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Lisa's pregnant." The words hung in the air, and I felt my heart skip with what should have been joy. Another grandchild, another blessing for our family. But Daniel's tone suggested this news came with complications I hadn't yet understood. "That's wonderful news," I said carefully. "Isn't it?" "It would be, if we could afford it." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, we're barely making it financially as it is. The house payment, the cars, the girls' school expenses, adding another child, another mouth to feed, medical bills, daycare costs." I could hear the genuine terror in his voice, the overwhelming anxiety of a man who was already stretched beyond his means, facing an expense he couldn't possibly absorb. "Daniel, slow down. We can figure this out. There are always solutions." "Are there? Because I've been running numbers all week, and I can't make any scenario work. Even with me picking up every overtime shift available, even with Lisa working part-time after the baby comes, we're looking at going deeper into debt every month." This was a side of my son I rarely saw. The frightened young man who still lived underneath the confident exterior he tried to maintain. It reminded me of the little boy who used to worry about whether we'd have enough money for groceries after his father died, the child who had absorbed more financial anxiety than any 8-year-old should have to carry. "Have you talked to Lisa about this?" "That's the other problem." Daniel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She wants to ask you for help. Major help. She's talking about requesting a significant loan, maybe even asking you to co-sign for a bigger house, since we'll need more space." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "And how do you feel about that?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Mom, I love you, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for us. But asking for another major financial bailout so soon after everything that happened, it feels wrong. It feels like we haven't learned anything." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. With Daniel oscillating between panic about their financial situation and guilt about potentially needing to ask for my help again. By the time we hung up, I understood that our family was facing its first major test of the new dynamics we'd worked so hard to establish. 2 days later, Lisa called to request a lunch meeting. Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could detect the nervous energy underneath her practiced composure. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant halfway between our homes, the kind of place where private conversations could be had without interruption. Lisa arrived looking polished but tired, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach in a gesture that was both protective and anxious. She ordered sparkling water while I had coffee, and we made small talk about the twins' end-of-school activities until our food arrived. "Dorothy," she began when the waiter had left us alone, "I suppose Daniel told you our news." "He did. Congratulations. How are you feeling?" "Physically, fine. Emotionally." Lisa paused, choosing her words carefully. "Overwhelmed. This pregnancy wasn't planned, and the timing is challenging from a financial standpoint." I waited for her to continue, curious to see how she would approach what I suspected was a request for financial assistance. "I've been thinking about our conversation after the Chicago trip, about honesty and transparency in our family relationships. So I want to be completely upfront with you about our situation." Lisa pulled out a folder from her purse and spread several documents on the table between us. Financial statements, budget worksheets, pregnancy expense estimates, everything laid out with the kind of methodical organization that reminded me of my own professional approach to financial planning. "These are our current monthly expenses," she said, pointing to a detailed spreadsheet. "And these are the projected additional costs associated with the pregnancy and a new baby. Even with Daniel working overtime and me returning to work part-time, we're looking at a shortfall of about $1,800 a month." I studied the documents, impressed despite myself by the thoroughness of her analysis. Every expense was documented, every projection supported by research. This wasn't a casual request for help. It was a comprehensive presentation of their financial reality. "You've put a lot of work into this analysis," I observed. "I wanted you to see exactly what we're dealing with," Lisa replied. "No vague requests or emotional appeals, just the facts." And what specifically are you asking me to do with these facts? Lisa took a deep breath before responding. I'm asking if you would consider providing a loan to help us through the first 2 years after the baby is born. Properly documented, with clear repayment terms and reasonable interest. Not a gift, not a bailout, but a genuine business arrangement between family members. I had to admit, her approach was impressive. Instead of the emotional manipulation or entitled expectations that had characterized her past interactions with me, she was presenting this as a legitimate financial proposition. How much are we talking about? $43,000 spread over 24 months. That would cover the projected shortfall, plus a small emergency buffer. Lisa's voice remained steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. It was a significant amount, but not beyond my means. More importantly, the way she was requesting it demonstrated a fundamental shift in her understanding of our relationship. This wasn't the Lisa who had made me sleep on an office sofa, or conducted psychological experiments with hired actors. This was a woman who had done her homework and was making a professional presentation to a potential lender. What happens if I say no? I asked. Lisa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was smaller than it had been during her presentation. Honestly, we'll probably have to sell the house. Move to a smaller place, maybe a rental. Pull the girls out of private school. Daniel might have to find a second job, which would mean he'd rarely see the children. It would mean completely restructuring our lives around financial survival rather than family stability. The weight of that reality settled between us. This wasn't about maintaining a comfortable lifestyle or avoiding minor inconveniences. This was about the fundamental security of my son's family, about whether my granddaughters would grow up in stability or chaos. And if I say yes, then we have a chance to maintain the family life we've built while properly managing the financial impact of expanding our family. The girls don't have to change schools. Daniel doesn't have to sacrifice time with his children to work multiple jobs. And we can focus on being good parents instead of just surviving financially. I closed the folder and sat back in my chair, studying Lisa's face. The woman across from me bore little resemblance to the manipulative person who had orchestrated my humiliation months earlier. This Lisa was vulnerable, honest, and asking for help in a way that acknowledged both my autonomy and her own responsibility. I need to think about this, I said finally. Not just the financial aspects, but what it means for our family relationships going forward. Of course, take all the time you need. Lisa paused, then added, Dorothy, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I understand. You've already been incredibly generous with our family. You don't owe us anything more. That acknowledgement, that I didn't owe them anything, was perhaps the most significant indicator of how much Lisa had changed. The old Lisa would have presented this request as an expectation, as something I should want to do for my family. This Lisa understood that my help was a choice, not an obligation. After lunch, I drove home and called Patricia Rodriguez. If I was going to consider this loan seriously, I needed professional advice about structuring it properly. Dorothy, Patricia said when I explained the situation, I have to ask, are you considering this because it's a good financial decision, or because you feel pressured to help? Neither, I replied honestly. I'm considering it because I believe Lisa has genuinely changed, and because I think this might be an opportunity to demonstrate that our new family dynamic can handle major challenges. What do you mean? She came to me with honest information, a professional presentation, and clear expectations about repayment. She acknowledged that I have the right to say no. She treated me like a respected family member, whose decision would be accepted whatever I chose. That's exactly the kind of relationship I was trying to create when I froze their accounts. Patricia was quiet for a moment. So this would be a test of whether the lessons from your earlier intervention actually took hold. Partly, but it would also be a test of whether I can maintain appropriate boundaries while still being generous. Whether I can help without enabling, support without being taken advantage of. Those are difficult balances to maintain. They are, but I think Lisa's approach suggests she understands those balances now too. We spent the next hour discussing the technical aspects of structuring a family loan, documentation requirements, interest rates, repayment schedules, and legal protections. By the time we finished, I had a clear framework for how such an arrangement could work if I decided to move forward. That evening, I called Daniel to get his perspective on Lisa's request. "She told you about the lunch meeting?" he asked. "She did. I'm curious about your feelings on this potential loan arrangement." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, Mom, I'm conflicted. Part of me is grateful that Lisa approached you professionally, instead of just assuming you'd help. But part of me worries that we're falling back into old patterns of depending on you to solve our problems. What would you prefer to do?" "If it were just me, I'd probably try to figure out a way to manage without asking for help. Take on more debt, work more hours, make whatever sacrifices necessary. But it's not just me, it's Lisa and the girls, and this new baby. And watching Lisa struggle with guilt about the pregnancy because of the financial stress, that's not fair to any of them." I could hear the conflict in his voice, the tension between pride and pragmatism that was tearing him apart. "Daniel, what if I told you that I'm considering this loan not because I feel obligated to help, but because I believe it's actually a good decision for our family?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that Lisa's approach to this request has shown me that she's learned something important about respect and responsibility. She's asking for help in a way that acknowledges my autonomy and demonstrates her own accountability. That's growth worth supporting." "So you're thinking of saying yes?" "I'm thinking of structuring an arrangement that helps your family while maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations. But only if everyone involved understands that this is a business relationship, not a gift, and that future financial decisions need to be made with careful consideration of your actual resources." Daniel was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Mom, if you do this, it won't just be about the money. It'll be about believing in us, about trusting that we've learned from our mistakes. That means more than you probably realize." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and thought about the journey our family had taken over the past few months. From manipulation and disrespect, to genuine communication and mutual consideration. From entitled expectations to professional presentations. From taking advantage of my generosity to appreciating and reciprocating it. The request Lisa had made wasn't just about money. It was about whether the new foundation we'd built could support the weight of real challenges. Whether the respect and honesty we'd cultivated could survive the stress of genuine need. I had 48 hours to decide whether to trust the progress we'd made, or whether this request represented a backslide into old patterns of dependence and enabling. The choice I made would determine not just their financial future but the future of our family relationships. And this time there were no easy answers. I had to decide. The 48 hours I'd given myself to decide stretched like an eternity. I found myself analyzing the situation from every possible angle. Financial, emotional, relational, and practical. This wasn't just about whether to lend money to my son's family. It was about whether I believed people could genuinely change, whether the foundation we'd rebuilt could withstand real pressure, and whether trust, once broken, could be authentically restored. On Thursday morning, I drove to my bank and met with my personal banker, Margaret Chen, who had been handling my accounts for over a decade. She was one of the few people who understood the full scope of my financial capabilities and had witnessed my journey from struggling single mother to financially secure retiree. "Margaret, I need to discuss structuring a significant family loan," I began, spreading Lisa's documentation across her desk. "I want to make sure I'm approaching this with appropriate protections for everyone involved." Margaret reviewed the materials with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless family financial arrangements go both well and poorly. "This is very thoroughly prepared," she observed. "Usually when family members ask for loans, they come in with emotional appeals and vague promises. This looks like a legitimate business proposal." "That's exactly what gave me pause," I admitted. "The person who prepared this presentation is not the same person who was manipulating and disrespecting me 6 months ago. The question is whether this change is genuine or just sophisticated strategy." "What does your gut tell you?" I considered the question. My gut, informed by 78 years of experience with human nature and 45 years of professional financial dealings, was telling me something I hadn't expected. "My gut says this is real," I said slowly. "The level of detail, the acknowledgement of my right to refuse, the professional approach to what could have been an emotional manipulation, it all suggests someone who has fundamentally shifted their perspective." Margaret nodded. "And from a purely financial standpoint, can you afford this loan if it's never repaid?" "Yes, without compromising my own security or retirement needs." Then the question becomes whether making this loan serves your broader family goals, not just whether you can afford to lose the money. We spent the next hour structuring the loan with proper legal documentation, reasonable interest rates that reflected both family relationship and business reality, and clear consequences for default that wouldn't destroy relationships but would protect my interests. By the time I left the bank, I had a comprehensive loan agreement that balanced generosity with prudence. That afternoon, I called Lisa and asked her to come to my house for a private conversation. When she arrived, I could see the nervous anticipation in her eyes, but also a composure that suggested she was prepared for whatever answer I might give. "I've reviewed your proposal," I began, gesturing for her to sit in my living room, "and I've consulted with my financial advisors about the best way to structure this kind of arrangement." Lisa's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, but her expression remained steady. "And what did you decide?" "I've decided to approve the loan, with some modifications to the terms you proposed." The relief that flooded Lisa's face was unmistakable, but she managed to maintain her professional demeanor. "What kind of modifications?" I handed her the formal loan agreement that Margaret and I had prepared. "The principal amount and repayment schedule remain as you requested. However, I've added some additional terms that I believe will benefit all of us." Lisa read through the document carefully, her eyebrows rising as she encountered the unexpected clauses. "Quarterly financial reviews? Annual family meetings to discuss the loan status?" "Lisa, this loan represents a significant investment in your family's future. But more than that, it represents my trust in the changes you've made. The review processes aren't about monitoring or controlling your spending. They're about maintaining the transparency and communication that have made our new relationship possible." She continued reading, pausing at another clause. "Required financial education sessions? I'd like you and Daniel to meet with Patricia Rodriguez, my former colleague who now runs her own financial planning firm. Not because I think you're irresponsible with money, but because managing finances with 3 children requires different strategies than managing them with 2. Lisa looked up from the document, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Dorothy, these terms, they're not punitive. They're supportive." "Of course they're supportive. This entire arrangement is about supporting your family while maintaining the mutual respect we've worked so hard to establish. I expected conditions and restrictions. I expected you to use this loan as leverage to control our decisions. But these requirements are actually helpful." I realized that Lisa had been anticipating a return to the power dynamics that had characterized our relationship before my financial intervention. She had expected me to use this loan as a way to regain control, to make demands, to treat her with the same kind of manipulation she had once used against me. "Lisa," I said gently, "the goal isn't to control you. The goal is to help you succeed. If this loan enables your family to thrive, then it's a good investment for everyone involved." She signed the agreement without further hesitation, but then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you say yes? After everything that happened, after all the ways I treated you badly, why are you willing to trust us with this kind of money?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself throughout the decision-making process. "Because," I said slowly, "the woman who came to me with this request is not the woman who hired actors to humiliate me. The approach you took, the respect you showed, the responsibility you demonstrated, it all tells me that the lesson I tried to teach actually took hold." Lisa was quiet for a moment, then said, "It did take hold. More than you probably realize. That night when you froze our accounts, when I had to come here and beg for access to our own money, it was the first time I really understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy. And I realized that I had been putting you in that exact position for months, making you feel like your comfort and dignity were subject to my approval, making you feel like you had to earn basic respect." Lisa's voice grew quieter. I didn't like how it felt, and I couldn't believe I had been doing it to someone else. This was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and I felt something shift between us. Not just the careful politeness we'd maintained since our contract, but genuine understanding and mutual respect. "People can change, Lisa," I said, "but only when they're willing to do the hard work of examining their own behavior and taking responsibility for it." "I'm trying to do that work," she replied. "Every day." Over the following weeks, the impact of our new arrangement became apparent in ways I hadn't anticipated. Daniel seemed lighter, less burdened by the financial anxiety that had been consuming him. The twins, sensing the reduced stress in their household, became more relaxed and open during our family gatherings. And Lisa began including me in family decisions in ways that felt natural rather than obligatory. The first quarterly financial review took place in August, with Patricia Rodriguez facilitating the meeting in her office. Instead of the awkward, defensive encounter I had worried it might become, it turned out to be an informative and collaborative discussion about budgeting strategies and long-term financial planning. "Your spending patterns are very reasonable," Patricia told Daniel and Lisa as we reviewed their quarterly reports. "You're living within your means while maintaining the loan payments, which suggests good financial discipline." "Dorothy's loan made that possible," Lisa said, looking directly at me. "Without the panic about how to pay for basic necessities, we could actually plan instead of just react to one crisis after another." But the real test of our new dynamic came in September, when an unexpected opportunity arose that could have destabilized everything we'd built. Daniel's supervisor approached him about a promotion that would involve relocating to the company's Denver office. The position came with a significant salary increase, enough to make the family financially independent of my support within 2 years. But it also meant leaving Minnesota, leaving me, potentially disrupting the twins' education and social connections. When Daniel called to tell me about the opportunity, I could hear the conflict in his voice. "It's an amazing career move, Mom, the kind of advancement that doesn't come along very often. But the timing is complicated, with the baby coming and the loan arrangement and everything we've just rebuilt with our family relationships." "What does Lisa think about it?" "That's the thing. She wants to take it, but she's worried about how you'll react. She's afraid you'll think we're trying to escape our obligations, or that we're taking the loan money and running." The old Dorothy might have seen this relocation as exactly that, an attempt to avoid accountability, to escape the oversight and relationship repair that had been so important to our family's healing. But as I listened to Daniel describe the opportunity and its implications, I realized this was actually the ultimate test of whether our new dynamic was built on genuine respect or just convenient compliance. "Daniel," I said carefully, "this decision should be based on what's best for your family's future, not on managing my feelings about it. But the loan, the quarterly reviews, the family meetings we've planned, can all be adjusted to accommodate your new circumstances. The important thing isn't maintaining specific arrangements. It's maintaining the respect and communication that made those arrangements possible." That weekend, Lisa and Daniel drove to my house for what we all understood would be a pivotal conversation about their future and our family relationships. "We want to be completely transparent with you," Lisa began, her professional presentation mode in full effect. "This opportunity represents a chance for us to achieve financial independence faster than we ever thought possible. But it also means significant changes to the loan arrangement and our family dynamics." She handed me a revised financial plan that accounted for the salary increase, the cost of relocating, and an accelerated repayment schedule that would have the loan settled within 18 months instead of 24. "More importantly," Daniel added, "we want you to know that if we take this position, we're not trying to escape our obligations to you. We want to arrange regular visits, video calls with the girls, continued involvement in all the major family decisions." I studied their faces as they outlined their plans, looking for signs of the old patterns. The assumption that my approval was required, the expectation that I would subordinate my feelings to their convenience, the subtle manipulation designed to make their preferred choice seem like the only reasonable option. Instead, what I saw was something unprecedented. 2 adults presenting me with honest information about a major life decision and genuinely seeking my input, rather than just my compliance. "This sounds like an incredible opportunity," I said finally. "And your approach to managing the challenges it creates shows me exactly how much you've both grown." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. "So you're okay with us moving?" Lisa asked. "I'm proud of you for earning this opportunity and for handling it with such maturity and consideration," I replied. "Distance doesn't have to diminish family relationships if everyone is committed to maintaining them." As they prepared to leave that afternoon, Lisa turned back to me with an expression of gratitude that seemed to encompass more than just this specific conversation. "Dorothy, I I need you to know that everything good that happens to our family from this point forward is partly because of the lesson you taught us. The respect, the communication, the accountability. It's changed how we approach everything. Looking back, I realized that the greatest success of my financial intervention hadn't been forcing compliance with a contract or extracting apologies for past behavior. It had been creating space for genuine growth, for people to choose better versions of themselves, and for relationships to be rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect rather than convenient accommodation. The hardest lesson I'd ever taught had become the most valuable one they'd ever learned. 2 years later, I stood in the arrivals terminal at Denver International Airport, watching travelers hurry past with their luggage and their busy lives, waiting for a familiar face to emerge from the gate. It was December again, that season that had once brought such pain and humiliation, but this December felt entirely different. Emma spotted me first, her 9-year-old legs carrying her faster than airport security probably appreciated. "Grandma Dot," she called, launching herself into my arms with the kind of uninhibited joy that made every mile of travel worthwhile. Sophie was right behind her, followed by Daniel carrying baby Michael, now a sturdy toddler with his father's eyes and what appeared to be my stubborn streak. Lisa brought up the rear, moving carefully through the crowd while visibly pregnant with their 4th child. "Mom," Daniel said, wrapping me in a one-armed hug while balancing his son. "You look great. Colorado mountain air must agree with you." I had been visiting them regularly since their move to Denver 18 months ago, but each reunion still felt like a small miracle. Not because we were reunited after time apart, but because these reunions were founded on something that had been missing from our family relationships for so long: genuine affection and mutual respect. "The altitude takes some getting used to," I admitted, "but seeing you all makes every bit of travel worth it." Their home in Denver was a modest ranch house in a family-friendly neighborhood, with a yard where the children could play and space for their growing family. It was smaller than their Minnesota house had been, but it felt warmer somehow, filled with the comfortable chaos of a family that had learned to appreciate what they had, rather than stress about what they lacked. As we drove through the mountain-framed cityscape, Lisa filled me in on the latest developments in their lives. Daniel's promotion had led to another advancement, putting them on track to complete their loan repayment 6 months ahead of schedule. Lisa had started a part-time consulting business that she could manage around the children's schedules. The twins were thriving in their new school, making friends and adjusting to mountain life with the resilience that children possess. "We have something to show you when we get home," Emma announced from the back seat, practically vibrating with excitement. "It's a surprise, but Sophie and I worked on it together." "A surprise?" I asked, catching Lisa's amused expression in the rearview mirror. "Should I be worried?" "It's a good surprise," Sophie assured me solemnly. "The best kind." Their house was decorated for Christmas with the kind of thoughtful touches that spoke of family traditions being consciously created rather than simply inherited. A tree that the children had obviously helped decorate, with ornaments hanging at distinctly child-height clusters. Stockings hung by a fireplace that actually worked, unlike the decorative one in their Minnesota house. Pictures of extended family, including several of me with the children, arranged prominently on the mantelpiece. After dinner, as we sat around their living room with mugs of hot chocolate and the comfortable tiredness that comes from a day spent with family, Emma and Sophie disappeared briefly before returning with a large, wrapped package. "This is our surprise," Emma announced, presenting it to me with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for state occasions. Inside was a photo album, but not just any photo album. The girls had created a comprehensive documentation of our family's journey over the past 2 years, with pictures from every visit, every video call, every shared experience since their move to Denver. But it was the written commentary that took my breath away. In Emma's careful 9-year-old handwriting and Sophie's more artistic script, they had documented not just events but feelings, observations about how our family had changed and grown. "This is from when you came to visit us in the hospital after baby Michael was born," Sophie explained, pointing to a picture of me holding my newest grandson for the first time. "You were crying happy tears, and Daddy said it was because you were so proud of our family. And this one is from my birthday party," Emma added, turning to a page filled with pictures from her celebration the previous summer. "You helped me with my math homework on video call, and then you flew here just for my party. Mom said that's what grandmas do when they love you very much." Page after page chronicled the evolution of our relationships, Holiday celebrations where I was a central participant rather than an afterthought. Family decisions made with my input and consideration. Grandchildren who spoke of me with obvious affection and pride. "Look at this page," Sophie said, turning to near the end of the album. It was filled with pictures from their recent visit to Minnesota, when they had come to see my house and meet my friends. We got to see where Daddy grew up and Grandma Dot's garden, and we met Mrs. Rodriguez, who helped Mommy and Daddy learn about money. The final page contained a letter written jointly by both girls, in alternating paragraphs that showed careful planning and coordination. "Dear Grandma Dot, we wanted to make this book to show you how important you are to our family. Before we moved to Denver, sometimes grown-ups seemed worried about things we didn't understand. But now everyone seems happier, especially Mommy and Daddy. Effelto boss, you teach us about numbers and help us with hard problems. You remember all our important days and make us feel special. When Mommy was scared about having the new baby, you told her that being nervous just means you care about doing something right. We know that you and Mommy and Daddy had some difficult times before we moved. We're too young to understand all of it, but we know that you helped our family learn how to treat each other better. Thank you for not giving up on us. We love you so much, and we can't wait for the new baby to meet the best grandma in the world. Love, Emma and Sophie." By the time I finished reading, there were tears streaming down my face, happy tears, as Sophie had correctly identified. But more than happiness, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if a long and difficult journey had finally brought me to exactly where I was meant to be. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," I managed to say, pulling both girls close for hugs that I wished could last forever. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Lisa and I sat on their back porch despite the December cold, wrapped in blankets and looking up at stars that seemed brighter in the thin mountain air. "Dorothy," Lisa said quietly, "I need to tell you something I've never said properly." I waited, watching our breath create small clouds in the frigid air. "That night when you froze our bank accounts, when you made me come to your house and sign that contract, I hated you. I thought you were vindictive and controlling and impossible to please." I turned to look at her, surprised by this sudden honesty about feelings I'd suspected but she'd never acknowledged. "I spent weeks plotting ways to get back at you, to show Daniel that you were manipulating him, to prove that you were the problem in our family." Lisa's voice was steady but quiet. "But slowly, as I started following the terms of that contract, something changed." "What changed?" "I changed. Having to treat you with basic respect, having to include you in decisions, having to acknowledge your contributions to our lives. It made me realize that I hadn't been doing those things before. And once I started doing them, I couldn't understand why I'd ever stopped." She was quiet for a moment, pulling her blanket tighter against the cold. "The person I was before, the person who hired actors to humiliate you, I don't like her very much. I don't understand how I became someone who could treat family that way. But I know that without your intervention, without you forcing me to confront my own behavior, I never would have become the person I am now." "And who are you now?" I asked gently. Lisa smiled, and I could see her breath in the porch light. "I'm someone who appreciates what she has instead of resenting what she doesn't have. I'm someone who understands that respect isn't conditional on convenience. I'm someone who's grateful for second chances and determined not to waste them." "Those are good things to be." "They are. And Dorothy, I need you to know that everything good in my life now, my marriage, my relationship with my children, my sense of myself as a decent person, all of it is built on the foundation of what you taught me." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of Denver twinkling in the valley below. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "The baby we're expecting, we've been talking about names. If it's a girl, we'd like to call her Dorothy, after her grandmother who saved our family." I felt my heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. "Lisa, that would be an honor. It seems fitting. The first Dorothy taught us what it means to be family. The second Dorothy will grow up, knowing that from the beginning." As I prepared for bed that night in their guest room, a real guest room, with comfortable furniture and thoughtful touches that made me feel genuinely welcomed, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From manipulation and disrespect to genuine love and mutual appreciation. From financial desperation to stability and independence. From broken relationships to stronger bonds than we'd ever had before. The lesson I'd taught with frozen bank accounts and financial pressure had been harsh but necessary. Sometimes the people we love can only learn respect through consequences, can only appreciate what they have by temporarily losing access to it. But the real success hadn't been in the lesson itself. It had been in everyone's willingness to learn from it, to grow beyond it, to build something better from the foundation of understanding it provided. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Minnesota, to my quiet house and my independent life. But I would carry with me the knowledge that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about choosing, every day, to treat the people you love with the dignity and respect they deserve. And sometimes, when that choice becomes difficult, it takes a grandmother with financial resources and a willingness to use them to remind everyone what love actually looks like. The cold outside their house was bitter, but inside, surrounded by the warmth of genuine family connection, everything felt exactly as it should be. Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most beautiful outcomes. And sometimes freezing someone's access to their bank accounts is actually the most loving thing you can do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.